glad to be with you guys. So my name is Margaret. I am currently a first grade teacher in Oakland, California. And Lani is currently...
Hi, everyone. I'm currently an assistant principal at a school in Oakland called Ascend. It's a TK8, coming to you live from my office. You might hear a bell every now and then. I'm happy to be here with you all.
So previously, Lani and I were both literacy coaches, we were interventionists, and then we also had the pleasure of working on a grant-funded project where we were helping coaches at 15 low-performing schools transform the instruction that was happening in TK to 2 classrooms to help align the instruction with the reading research. So what we're going to come at you today with is some of what we learned about the essential shifts necessary to transform classrooms from balanced literacy classrooms to those that are aligned with the reading research. We're going to talk about each of the essential components of effective reading instruction and some highlights from PDs that we've done on those topics. And then at the end of our session, we're going to have some time for you guys to collaborate with each other and to think through how you would want to respond to frequently asked questions and misconceptions that come up in your work talking with teachers about their instruction. So when we think about the goals for today, one goal that we have is to deepen our understanding of the components of effective reading instruction. We may know a lot about these components. Sometimes it's helpful to hear somebody else talk about it so that you're like, ooh, that's the nugget that I needed to have in order to be able to explain things clearly and concisely to people that I work with. Our second goal is to crowdsource some resources. So we want to work with you to make a collection of explanations and materials. One of the things that we found as coaches is that, yes, there's a lot of explaining that you have to do to other people. But what's better than that is to be able to sit alongside with someone and to be able to talk about an article or a podcast that you listen to or to watch a webinar together and to be able to make sense of it side by side so that the burden of explanation isn't on one person and the relationship between 2 people in a coaching situation, but instead you guys are able to pull in outside resources and digest them together. So we're going to collaborate and practice together how to address frequent misconceptions and how to answer questions that come up so that we're able to give some clear and concise answers. We're going to start with a poll. So the poll will be deployed in a moment. You are going to give the first answer, effortless, if you learned how to read before school began. If you learned relatively easily, you'll select the second option. That means you learned to read with some instruction. You may have some vague memory of being taught to read. If it was a little challenging, you're pretty sure that you learned to read with systematic phonics instruction and some hard work. And if it was very challenging, it took a lot of instruction, a whole lot of practice for you to learn how to read. So we're going to deploy the poll now and gather some data from you guys. Go ahead and fill it out. You guys are fast. Thank you. We're just over 75%. Pausing for one more moment to get those last 6 responses in. If you haven't answered yet, please do. All right, ending poll now. All right, and sharing the results. Take a look. What does this tell you about us as a group? You're welcome to come off of mute and lift your voice up into the space or type it into the chat. What do you know about us as a group from this data?
Skilled readers.
Yeah, say a little more, Mari.
Well, 94% of us learned either effortlessly or with little instruction, and I don't think that's typical of a cross-section of our students.
Thanks for sharing. Anyone else want to add on? Jessica put into the chat, we're drawn to teaching reading because we love it and it was easy for us to learn. Shannon added, we don't have the struggles that many of our students have. Anyone else want to add on? All right. So I think it's really important for us to think through, like Jeff is just saying, that language and reading development was relatively easy for the group and often informs how we teach, which probably doesn't align with the struggles our students may have. I couldn't have said that better myself. So let's take a look. When we take a look at this graphic, the reading ladder, this comes from Nancy Young. One of the things that's so helpful for us is to be able to see, like you guys were saying in the chat or off of mute, that the majority of our students require a kind of instruction that we ourselves didn't need. And one of the things that can be so helpful for us to realize is that given our own experiences of learning to read, we can vastly underestimate the kind of instruction that our students need. So we may think that being a little bit vaguer or looser or exploratory can work when in fact they need systematic, explicit instruction. We can also drastically underestimate the amount of repetition our students need. We may think like, oh, that would be boring if they had to do it again, instead of realizing like, no, they're starting to build their confidence up, their automaticity is kicking in, they're getting that thrill of skill that happens from sufficient practice. So when we think about what we know about effective reading instruction, over 20 years ago, the National Reading Panel created a collection of conclusive evidence for instruction. So they gathered together over 110,000 studies, I think it was, and found the need for explicit instruction and phonological awareness, systematic phonics instruction, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension. And I think one of the things that's important for us to realize is that most teachers kind of know the big five. Many of us can even rattle them off, but our understanding of each of those components can be rather limited. So what I mean by that is that it became so popular to discuss these big five as the 5 pillars of reading instruction. And it was like, well, if your program has these 5 things in it, if they can check the box and say, yep, we've got vocabulary in there, yep, there's comprehension or phonemic awareness, then we must be aligned with the reading research. And it's just not true. You can't synthesize things into a set of 5 check marks like this. So I think one of the things that can be really helpful is for us to understand that these things, they are not equivalent to each other in any way. We can't say apples to apples, pillar to pillar, these things are the same and therefore we need to handle them the same way. So the most concise explanation that I found came from a publication by Seidenberg, where he explains that phonological awareness is a type of knowledge that our students need to have. Systematic phonics is a type of instruction that we need to deliver. And then fluency, that's a characteristic of skilled reading. It's the symptom of having mastered your phonics, and having some good prosody comes from your language comprehension. Vocabulary, well, that's a component of our language. And then comprehension, that's the goal for all of this work. That's the condition that we're striving to create through high quality instruction. So when we think about these things and realizing that they're not apples to apples, not pillar to pillar, I think it can be really helpful for us to start thinking, well, how do they fit in some of the frameworks that are used to explain reading? So most of us are familiar with the simple view of reading. And I think it's important for us to say, like up front, the simple view of reading is off-putting to a lot of teachers because it's called the simple view of reading. It by no means proposes that reading is a simple process, but Goff and Tumner were trying to explain to teachers and to researchers the role of decoding in reading. So they have the D in the formula, standing for decoding, which is efficient word recognition. So this is not just sounding out words, it's being able to recognize words by sight. Then we've got the LC, standing for language comprehension, which is the ability to derive meaning from spoken language, to understand what people are saying. And then what we're shooting for is reading comprehension, the RC. So language comprehension becomes reading comprehension when the meaning comes from print. And I think that this is one of those things that balanced literacy has gotten backwards. Balanced literacy often proposes that reading comprehension is going to come first, and we'll talk a little bit about how that seems to pop up like in guided reading lessons, for example. But so the simple view of reading, we have got decoding skills times the language comprehension skills equals the amount of reading comprehension we can expect for a child. So we're going to talk a little bit about these formulas. So if we have the profile of a student who has all of the decoding skills that they need to read the text, they've got all the language comprehension skills they need to understand that text. The result is that they have all the reading comprehension possible from the passage. We have a fluent reader with good comprehension. Now, I want you guys to be ready to come off mute or use the chat. Please tell us if a child has half the decoding skills and all the language comprehension skills they need, what's the result for their reading comprehension? 1/2 times 1 is?
1/2.
Excellent. All right, thank you. So now let's think through, what does that 1/2 reading comprehension look like in the classroom? What do you see? A kiddo who?
Is not reading to learn yet very well.
Thank you. Can someone else add on?
Slow and deliberate reading.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what Donna said is really important, because if a child has slow and deliberate reading, we're actually looking at a typical kindergartner or first grader, one that's on a good trajectory towards reading achievement. Or we might actually be looking at a struggling reader who's in the upper grades. So a child who's struggling with decoding in the upper grades, what are some things that we notice? What behaviors do we see in the classroom? Oh yeah, I see Stephanie wrote, can read from context, but will not be able to decode unfamiliar words. And Iris is saying work avoidance behavior. Absolutely. That kid is like, I got to go to the bathroom, or I have a stomach ache, or they're coming up with something else to do. A student that a friend of mine was working with said it really clearly, that he thinks it's better to be bad than dumb. So those behaviors can come up because students are trying to hide the fact that they're feeling not good or feeling dumb when it comes to the reading that they are expected to do in the classroom. So we've got a typical K1 student on a good trajectory, or we have an older student that we might be slightly concerned about. Now, here's the formulas going the other way. If a child has all the decoding skills that they need, but half of the language comprehension, what's the result for reading comprehension? 1 times 1/2 is?
Still 1/2.
Totally, but this 1/2 looks different or sounds different. What are some things that we notice?
Low comprehension.
Yes. Who else can add on? Robotic reading. Thanks, Jessica. Go ahead, Niels.
A need for direct vocabulary instruction.
Yes. So this profile would fit a student who's an English language learner. And a lot of times what can happen is if a child is fluent in reading in Spanish, for example, they've learned how to lift the words up the page, they understand this decoding thing, but when it comes to being able to say what the words mean, they may struggle with it. All right, then we have this one. If a child has half the decoding skills and half the language comprehension skills, what's the result for reading comprehension?
Low comprehension, low fluency.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Niels.
It means that they're going to need phonics instruction and direct vocabulary instruction.
Exactly. And like Jessica just put in the chat, the result is 1/4 of the reading comprehension that we would want for that child. Aaron is saying less accumulation of knowledge from reading. And that's really important because we can start with a child who's in K or 1 and they're low on the decoding side of things. Of course they are. They haven't been taught how to read the code of English, but they come into us with lots of language they've been speaking for many years. If they don't get high quality decoding instruction in those early years, their profile may actually shift to fit this last explanation. And it's because, as Aaron was saying, if you aren't able to read the text, then you accumulate much less knowledge and vocabulary from because you don't have access to grade level text. All right, so the simple view of reading, once we understand that it's designed to help us understand the role of decoding in reading. And it's designed to help us understand that you can't compensate for poor decoding skills with language comprehension and vice versa. Then the question usually comes down to like, well, what is the language comprehension thing? Because I feel like that's an area that's not well addressed in teacher preparation programs, even in the curriculum that we're given or PD. So we're able to see Scarborough's rope from 2001, which breaks down the language comprehension strands and the word recognition strands, and helps us understand that for kiddos who are in the earlier years of their reading development, whether they're in kinder or first grade, or if they're struggling readers in the upper grades, these things actually, language comprehension and word recognition, need to be taught separately, because where they are in their development is different. They come to us with quite a bit of language. They have a lot of experience hearing and talking, but are lacking in the word recognition side. So our goal is to try to get the word recognition skills to catch up to the language comprehension. And then this is one of our favorite quotes from John Maynard Keynes. The difficulty lies not in the new ideas, but in escaping from the old ones. So often what we find is we can teach about the simple view of reading, and we can teach about Scarborough's rope, we can teach about these models. But if teachers aren't actually guided through the process of thinking through, well, I did this new learning, now what do I let go of? What ends up happening is we start trying to use those models to justify things that we are already doing. So it's important to be super clear, based on what we've now learned, what's the shift in practice going to be? So for us, working in a balanced literacy district, what we came to realize is that our district's model that put independent reading at the center with the largest chunk of instructional time, and then a variety of activities that the teacher would guide students through, needed to actually shift to more targeted instruction. So this is Scheffelbein's literacy framework. We found it to be really helpful in explaining the components of the decoding encoding side of the simple view of reading and the language comprehension side. And then to help us understand that these are the things that we need to teach and also assess so that students have all of the pieces they need in order to be motivated to read. So one of the big shifts that we had to work through is taking leaders and teachers through, instead of thinking about like, well, what activity is happening in the classroom? Are we doing guided reading? Are we doing shared writing? What are we doing? To what are students learning and how is this component of reading best taught? Another big shift that we had to move away from was the MSV, the meaning, structure, visual model of reading, the 3Qing model of reading, where the idea was there's lots of different ways to identify a word, to the Seidenberg-McClellan model of understanding reading, that connecting the sounds and the letters that represent them is an essential part of early reading instruction. And it's important that students first decode the word, then apply meaning to it, and then use the context to determine whether or not it's a word that can be pronounced multiple ways, what the definition of that word is in that context. So this essential shift was going from the belief that there's many ways to recognize a word, and it doesn't matter as long as the kid says the right word, to realizing, no, reading actually requires decoding. It is an essential part of reading comprehension. All right, so Lani's going to dive into the first part of our reading model with phonological awareness.
Yes, so we're getting into the instruction that our students need based on these essential understandings. And again, we're going through the highlights to support our own thinking and also to take these little golden nuggets for sharing and supporting others. So phonological awareness, as Margaret mentioned, is a type of knowledge. And Emily Hanford explains why this is so important when she said, while we use our eyes to read, the starting point for reading is sound. Humans have been speaking for hundreds of thousands of years before the written code was developed. And so we need to, as educators or folks supporting educators, we need to support our students in developing phonological awareness, as it is the basis and prerequisite for phonics and reading and writing. So when we're thinking about what we should see in the classroom, we should see quite a bit more explicit instruction focused on hearing and articulating sounds. We want to see emphasis on moving towards phonemic proficiency, blending, segmenting, and manipulating sounds and words. So blending supports our students in their ability to read or decode text. And just yesterday, I was working with a student who has mastered the letter sounds in isolation, but is not yet phonologically aware. And this showed up every time he tried to read a word. So for example, he saw the word mat and said, mat, following along in the word, and then said ran, seemingly pulling different words out of thin air because he was not tuning into the sounds he was lifting off the page. And similarly, segmenting supports our students in their ability to write or encode by hearing them hear each sound and get them on the paper. And manipulating sounds and spoken words builds phonemic proficiency, strengthening the brain's phonological processor, which creates a solid and strong foundation for automatic reading. And we want to make sure our teachers and we ourselves, if we're in the classroom, are screening and progress monitoring to mastery, because simply exposing our students to phonological practices is not enough. We must monitor towards mastery and towards proficiency. So we have this more column, and in less, just more. We need to see more of it. We need the students to be practicing. And one thing that I've made sure to clarify both in my own learning journey and in working with teachers and coaches is the difference between phonological awareness and phonics, which will be the next section that Margaret will articulate soon. But right now we have, you're in an interactive workshop, and we are in this time for processing and crowd sharing, crowdsourcing, as Margaret explained earlier. So we're calling this pause a pause in Padlet. And for those of you who are not very familiar with Padlet, I'm going to give some introduction about what how Padlet works and what we would like your support in with the pause and Padlet for reflection. So I'm going to move over to the Padlet. Do we see the Padlet here shared on the screen? All right, and the link is now back in the chat. We have several columns here. We just spoke about phonological awareness. So we're looking first at this first column. And we have here the two questions that were just previously on the screen. What helped you understand the importance of phonemic awareness? And what resources would you share with a teacher who doesn't understand its importance? And a reminder of the slide we just saw. To answer the question, we click here. Oh, I see somebody's already answering. That's great. So I'm clicking here, and I can title my response and write something that I want to remember when engaging in this conversation with teachers I'm supporting, or what I want to remember for my own practice. So I'm responding to those questions by adding a plus. Here I gave an example. I used a great phrase as my title, and the starting point for reading is sound, because I really want to remember that as a golden nugget to share with others. And I got that from Emily Hanford's Hard Words APM report article. So I can copy the link here. I can add it to the Padlet. I can go edit and add it. I'm going to press edit again and add it as a link, so that we are contributing to a large amount of resources that we can all engage in together and have as a resource. So I'm going back here to the questions. We're going to give 2 minutes here for a pause in Padlet. Please add your ideas, and then we'll come back together.
All right, so feel free to continue adding into the Padlet if you were mid-thought and didn't get a chance to finish. But we're going to move on in the interest of time to start talking about phonics. So phonological awareness is necessary in order for phonics instruction to stick. A kid needs to understand the purpose of phonics. Prerequisite is phonemic awareness. So phonics is a type of instruction helping students understand how to connect the sounds and the letters that represent them. I think one of the things that has been really important for me to realize is that teachers like me drastically underestimated the importance and the utility of phonics. So I think it's really important to make sure that we're all aware that teaching sounds and spelling patterns supports reading in a very reliable way. I think a lot of times what happens when I talk with primary grade teachers is that we hold on to the 3 cueing model of teaching reading because we're afraid that phonics isn't going to work for a lot of words. So this article, How Spelling Supports Reading by Dr. Moats, is really helpful for helping us understand that half of all English words are predictably represented by their spelling. You can just sound them out. And that another 34% of words have just one sound that needs to be tweaked a little bit if we're sounding it out. So an example of that would be a word like independent. If a child were to sound it out, they would say independent, but the word isn't independent. The word is independent. But another 34% of words you can sound out, and if you have strong phonological awareness, tweak a sound to be able to try for the real word and pronounce the word as you would when talking. So 84% of words are mostly predictable. And if we factor in word origins in meaning, then we've got just 4% of words that can't be sounded out. So an example of that would be like in the word healthy, sometimes we'll look at it and be like, why is the short E spelled EA? But if we help our students understand that at the root of the word healthy is the word heal, then we're able to understand that the cool thing about English is not only does our written code represent the sounds we say, it also gives us insight to the meanings of words. So the word healthy, when we see it in print, lets us know that it has something to do with healing. So 84% of the words can be tackled very easily with high quality phonics instruction in grades K1 and 2. And if we start bringing in morphology, then we end up with students who have a clear understanding that their go-to strategy for being able to pronounce a word and gather some insight to its meaning, that's the word itself. So this resulted in a really big shift for kindergarten teachers in particular. Kindergarten teachers have to deal with that 4% of words that are not pronounced, cannot be sounded out. So we're thinking about words like the, for example, or was. So for us, kindergarten teachers in our district had been told that proficiency would be measured by a student being able to recite a text while pointing to the words in it. So this comes from the F&P benchmark assessment that we were asked to do, as the culminating activity for kindergarten was to read a level D book. So the teacher would say, in this story, each animal went in the nice little house and said, what a nice little house, basically telling the child the words that are in the book. And then the kid would need to remember those words and use the picture to cue for the remaining words that were in the text. What we were doing when saying that actually the focus needs to be on sounding out words was completely shifting the job of the kindergarten teacher, so that this recitation of a text was no longer what was considered on track. And instead, what we would want our students to do is to get to an unfamiliar word and immediately start sounding it out. So it was really helpful for us to help teachers understand predictable books, their purpose, and the problems that they cause in a primary grade classroom. So, predictable books aim to teach children to predict words. That's why they're called predictable texts. While decodables aim to support decoding instruction. We undermine phonics instruction when we hand children predictable books, because the texts are purpose-written to show children that predicting words is a viable alternative to sounding them out. Predictable books may be everywhere, but that doesn't mean that elementary school children and teachers should be using them. If we want our children to become skilled readers and attend to words as they read, we need to use materials that teach them to value the letters on the page. So this is a huge shift, because a lot of teachers have spent a lot of time and a lot of money collecting predictable books and feeling like if we put them in the hands of our students, that they're getting the practice being able to read accurately. And in fact, what we're giving them is practice on guessing words that they're not able to sound out. I think one of the biggest concerns when shifting from predictable text to decodable text is worrying about like unnatural language or really lame stories. We want to make sure that kids have books that they're going to enjoy when they need to read independently. So I know for me, I felt a little bit resistant to trying to give a kid a book about like a mat and a cat and somebody who sat, just feeling like that language would be really stilted. And then what I came to realize is that actually students get a huge thrill out of being able to sound out words. So I'm going to share with you a little video of one of the students in my classroom at the very beginning of this year.
Hey guys, I'm reading my favorite story again. This is called The Mat, and I love it so much. A mat. I sat on the mat.
So if you didn't catch that, what Samaj says is, I'm reading my favorite book again. And I think one of the things that I needed to realize is, just like I had to push aside my own assumptions about how much practice a child would need because I learned to read relatively easily, I needed to push aside my belief of what would or would not be engaging for students, because she's clearly getting thrill from the fact that she's able to put the letters to sounds and be able to pronounce words while looking at a text on the page or on the screen, because we were in remote learning. All right, so.
Hey guys, I'm reading my favorite story again.
You were getting a little extra of Samaj. All right, so when it comes to our practice for beginning readers, moving away from predictable books that are purpose written to teach students that they have alternatives to decoding. So predictable books are designed to have words in them that kids have not been taught to sound out. And the reason for that is that they want students to use multiple cues to guess words, because predictable texts undermine the utility of sounding words out. So making that shift from predictable books to decodable text is super important. With decodable text, we can ensure that kids actually get sufficient practice in applying phonics to reading words. So when we think about instruction for phonics, we want way more explicit, systematic, cumulative teaching of spelling sound correspondence and meaningful word parts. We want a whole lot less of kids guessing at words based on the context, the sentence structure, or reading a word just by cueing off of the first or last letter. We want way more application of word reading skills to text. So often in balanced literacy, there's word work, but then the word work is never applied to authentic reading and writing. We want less opportunistic instruction on spelling patterns. So less of the, hey, this would be a handy strategy or a phonics skill for you to learn in order to be able to read this one book that I'm presenting to you. And instead operating off of a scope and sequence that moves from high utility spelling patterns to lower utility ones. And then here's the key. We want way more in the way of prompting sound it out before asking a child, does it make sense? So if we're asking students to shift from guessing based on context or sentence structure or pictures, we need to direct their attention to the words on the page. They need to actually arrive at a pronunciation of the word prior to us saying, does it make sense? That means moving away from predictable books, because when students are given predictable books, we're teaching them that they have viable alternatives to attending to the words on the page. We're giving them the impression that they can read a word based on guessing what would make sense, based on the syntax of the sentence, based on the picture, based on their understanding of the story, or the fact that there's a predictable pattern. So this is a lot to digest, and I noticed there are some comments or questions in the chat box, which are going to be perfect to throw up onto our Padlet. So we're going to pause and Padlet. The question is, what explanations, resources, and materials might help shift practice for a teacher who believes that contextual guessing is the same thing as reading? And this is where we can really stop to think about the role of predictable books and what they're teaching our students about the reading process. So we're going to go back over into our Padlet, and we're now in the phonics column. We've got the question here, so what explanations, resources, and materials might you use? And a recap of some of the shifts that are necessary. Go ahead and add onto it your own thoughts and resources. If you have questions that you want to make sure we get answered or that the group answers also, We've got FAQs and any questions from you. So you're welcome to work on these far right-hand columns too, if that would be helpful to you. We've got 2 minutes now for our pause and Padlet.
Just a few more minutes to wrap up your last thought on that pause and Padlet. And this resource is going to be available for you moving forward. So feel free after this interactive workshop to continue to add ideas, comment, and engage in the conversation together. We're hoping this is something that could be a resource for you ongoing. So, as Margaret explained earlier, fluency is a symptom of accurate automatic reading, and fluency comes after careful, often laborious reading practice. Particularly with kindergarten teachers, we call this the labor of love, because it is a labor of love to build fluency and to make sure that our students are really attending to every letter in the text to build towards automaticity. So what this means is that students learn to attend to every letter and every word, and they have learned to do it so well that they don't even need to think about their decoding. That's when we get a fluent reader. And what we don't want is this. And somebody asked in the chat, like, why not use both? Sometimes when we are over reliant on predictable text, or we're using both, we get kids like this. This is an actual quote from a first grader that Margaret was working with. I can read this with my eyes shut. We don't want that. That's not reading. And when Margaret was speaking to why predictable books are problematic, another reason is they do not allow for fluent reading. And if a kid isn't attending to the letters on the page, they're not reading. And the result is a faulty understanding of what reading really is. So in our own classrooms and the classrooms we're supporting, we want more of a focus on reading accuracy and less of that MSV analysis. We want more practice with rereading, partner reading, reading with a model to develop prosody and automaticity. Students will be better supported when they have plenty of time to apply all the sound spelling they're learning in their phonics instruction to text. So these practices are some examples that will develop prosody, develop automaticity, much more so than a predictable book, which instead perpetuates those counterproductive habits. And we want to make sure that we're monitoring that progress to true oral reading fluency. So we want explicit measurable goals by each grade level and the skills associated. I've seen at first teachers hesitant to or avoiding measuring words correct per minute because they don't want to push kids to read faster and faster. And at first, we don't want them to read faster and faster. We want them to focus on accuracy. But over time, we want them to develop that speed. And we want them to get to like reading like they're speaking. It's about 60 words correct per minute that we move away from disfluent reading to fluent reading in the sense of understanding and being able to attend to meaning, which is our ultimate goal. And to understand what we read, we must first be able to lift the words off the page and do so with ease. In their book, Know Better, Do Better, Meredith and David Lieben state, fluency does not guarantee comprehension, but a lack of fluency guarantees a lack of comprehension. So this is the first step. And when Margaret was talking about the simple view of reading, building fluency is that D, the decoding, and that needs to be there for true reading comprehension. So we've made it to our next pause and Padlet, and want to make sure that you have an opportunity to respond and engage with the following questions. One is, what would you say or share to help a teacher understand the importance of reading accuracy? What would you say or share to help a teacher understand that measuring automaticity will not turn students into word callers? And then what resources might help a teacher to see the connection between reading fluency and comprehension? What nuggets do you want to hold true? Going back to the Padlet for 2 minutes, and we're now working in the fluency column. Excited to hear your ideas.
And coming back together. So this is one of our favorite infographics. All kids need in order to read, in order to learn how to read, as Phonics said, no one ever. And I think it's really important for us to be really clear about this, because a lot of times the discussion about the science of reading or the need to shift away from balanced literacy seems to come across as people who care about reading research only care about phonics. And that is absolutely not true. However, the shift is necessary because balanced literacy misunderstood the role of phonics in reading. Balanced literacy believed that phonics was one way to approach the word, but there might be multiple ways. You could pay attention to sentence structure, you could pay attention to the pictures, you could pay attention to the predictable pattern, for example. So one of the reasons why we start talking about phonics a lot is because that actually is one of the biggest instructional shifts and the biggest adult learning shifts that needs to happen. But of course, the language comprehension side of things is super important. So we're going to take a look at the vocabulary and comprehension section. So vocabulary is a component of language, and comprehension is that goal or condition that we create. So when we look at Scarborough's rope, when we're talking about comprehension of text, we're talking about skilled reading, which is the fluent execution of word recognition and language comprehension. Both vocabulary and language comprehension fall on the upper strand here. So we're going to do a quick little question in the chat. You guys are going to type in the title of the book that you think would maximize student learning when it comes to language comprehension. So I'm going to show you two books, and you're going to be thinking through which one provides the best opportunity for vocabulary development, language structure, verbal reasoning, which one provides the best opportunities for discussion. You've got option number one, which is called The Food Chain. The text reads, "A grasshopper eats the leaves on a plant. The grasshopper grows bigger. A frog eats the grasshopper. The frog grows bigger." Text number two is called One Tiny Turtle, and I'll read just a section of it. "She's a baby, so her shell is soft as old leather. Just a little fish bite could rip it open, but the turtle is safe in her world of weed and snaps her beak on tiny crabs and shrimps." Please type in the chat which text would maximize student language development. I see One Tiny Turtle. I see the choice second book, One Tiny Turtle. Number two. Seems like we're building consensus. Yep. Okay. So according to our chat, unless anyone wants to chime in, it looks like we're leaning towards the One Tiny Turtle quite strongly. And this is really important. So we talked about how predictable leveled texts are not effective for decoding instruction. They're also not super helpful for developing language comprehension. And the reason for that is that we don't get the opportunity to expose students to concepts that they don't know a whole lot about. We don't get the opportunity to have rich discussions where they're trying to make sense of text, needing to articulate their verbal reasoning, or needing to break down the grammatical structures that are in the book, or needing to understand, like, in this context, what does this mean when we talk about the world of weed, for example? What does that mean if we're talking about a sea creature? In a leveled book, we get the opportunity only of being like, this is a grasshopper. Here's the picture of a grasshopper. Our conversations are really stilted because the books are stilted. They're intended to address both decoding and language comprehension at the same time, so they have to weaken their approach to both. This quote was one that I came upon kind of early in my journey into the reading research. It comes from the article "Teaching Reading is Rocket Science," which was recently rewritten and re-released. "Scientists now estimate that 95% of all children can be taught to read at a level constrained only by their reasoning and listening comprehension abilities. It is clear that students need not fail at the rate they do." And the first time I saw this quote, I went to that percentage, 95% of children. That's what we should be expecting from our literacy rates. But then as the years went by and I was learning more about the language comprehension side of things, here's what I realized. The decoding side of things, that's actually the easy side to teach. It's the easy side to get right. The fact that we have students with word reading difficulties in the upper grades, that's basically inexcusable because it is a fixable problem with high quality instruction and sufficient repetition for students. The language comprehension side of things, that's where the harder work lies, because the language comprehension sets the upper limit for students' reading comprehension. So when we have a vast range of knowledge, background knowledge, when we have a vast range of vocabulary development in our students, we have to try to figure out a way to close that gap so that all of our students have strong listening comprehension abilities. They can talk about complex text, so that when their decoding skills catch up to their language comprehension, they are reading at grade level. So we're going to pause and Padlet. This time we'll stop for 3 minutes because you've got 2 topics. The first topic is vocabulary. You're welcome to answer either of these questions. What would you say or share in a discussion with a teacher who provides vocabulary instruction during guided reading with leveled books? Or what resources might help a teacher ensure that all students actively engage with academic vocabulary? The next question is related to comprehension. So what explanations and resources might help a teacher ensure that every child gets a chance to think and talk about grade level text every day? So you're going to take a look back over into the Padlet. And in the Padlet, we're working now in 2 columns. We're working in the vocabulary column here and also in the comprehension column here. And I can see some of you guys are already getting going on this. Perfect. And don't forget, if you want to stick in any questions to the FAQs or questions for us, you're welcome to do that in the Padlet.
All right, folks, we've had some time to process on our own individually. And now we're moving into a time to collaborate with one another so that you're able to respond to frequently asked questions and misconceptions, engage with one another. How will we best respond to these questions as they arise? So our goal for this time is to collaborate and practice how to address a misconception or question. We have a process and we will copy this process into the chat so you have it available when breakout rooms open. First, you'll look at the Padlet and you'll select a topic in which you want to dive deeper into. Then you'll scroll to read the resources and responses from fellow participants. You'll select a question or misconception that has come up in that time. And then you'll allow every member to share their thinking. We're hoping that this time really allows you to think through it together. And Margaret and I will be bouncing through breakout rooms to support. You're also, please feel free to ask a question if you would like us to bounce in. Use the ask a question feature. So Shelby, the Zoom magician, is going to, if you are done with one question, feel free to move on to another topic if time allows. So Shelby, our Zoom magician, will open the breakout rooms and we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes. It is. Sue, thank you for sharing. For those just entering from the breakout rooms, we had a breakout room in the main session of stragglers who we couldn't figure out the breakout room for, and we were engaging in this conversation around our own experience and how to support others along that path. And that was really the purpose of this time together, to think about wherever we are is exactly where we are, wherever others is where they are, but we know what is right. And so how can we support with these resources that we have, talk to our colleagues and support our own thinking to really support our students in the way that we know will best set them up for success in the future. So this quote from Louisa Moats, I want to amplify and echo what she's saying. She says, the fact that teachers need better preparation, professional development, and resources to carry out deliberate instruction in reading, spelling, and writing should prompt action rather than criticism. And it should highlight the chronic gap between what teachers need and what they have been given. When I started teaching, I did not have the preparation, professional development, and resources. So Sue was just talking about how she had shame. She held her head in shame from years in the past of not having the tools. And we know better, we do better. So we're moving forward with action, supporting ourselves in our own education by attending these workshops in this conference, and then deliberately thinking about how we can continue to confidently talk the talk and spread resources and knowledge and talk about things with one another that really push thinking. She continues to say, just about all children can be taught to read and deserve no less from their teachers. Teachers in turn deserve no less than the knowledge, skills, and supported practice that will enable their teaching to succeed. There is no more important challenge for education to partake. So we love leaving our sessions. It's a quick session, but we love ending them with a call to action. So thinking about the collaborative conversation you just had, albeit short, and this call to action, we would love to hear what you are leaving and excited to share with others, knowing that the time is always right to do the right thing, and what additional actions you want to take. So we just want to take a few moments before we close out to share in the chat or out loud. What is it that you're leaving excited to share, continue thinking about, or actions that you'd like to take?
I'm excited to share the concept that it shouldn't be overly repetitive, that we shouldn't be just using these kind of boring reading texts that have the same words over and over to where the students just memorize or guess at words. I've always thought that reading should be fun and that we should be varying the reading materials we provide. And sometimes I get told the opposite. And I'm just excited that, I feel validated in that opinion.
I was seeing something on the Padlet that was so helpful to me. Someone wrote that comprehension and memorization are not the same thing. I think it's also really helpful to frame it as memorization and reading fluency are not the same thing. So we don't want students to have a text that they are just reciting because they've already read it a whole bunch of times. We want them to be able to tackle new and novel words with the phonics that they've been taught. What have others been thinking?
We'll use this paused moment as an opportunity to just say that we are running down on our time together, so we have a few more minutes. And I just wanted to encourage all of you, as you're thinking of any questions, to add to the chat and ask our wonderful presenters today. Please take a moment to fill out our feedback survey. We do use the information, and that information and feedback does go back to the presenters that we have had as guests today. We deeply appreciate knowing your perspective and feedback, and we love improving. So please do that. And we still have a couple of minutes. So if you have a question.
I want to make sure at least somebody reads this quote from Jeff that was in the chat. There are many problems in education that we don't know how to solve, but reading failure in elementary school isn't one of them. And this comes from the good Robert Slavin, who left us this last weekend. Any other thoughts or questions before we close?
There was a question about a reading list of decodable texts, if that's something that's available. I'm just going to highlight a couple of other questions that are on the Padlet as well. Evidence to prove the reading ladder percentages.
I put a PDF to the citations that Nancy Young uses.
Perfect. And then language screeners as part of your universal screener were two other questions.
Yeah, so starting with the question about decodable text, I think the most important thing to realize is that any text is decodable. The issue is, has the child been taught the phonics necessary to read that text? So we don't actually recommend pulling decodables from all different sources. What we recommend is knowing what your scope and sequence is and making sure that the text that you're providing students aligns with what they have been taught and what you're expecting them to practice. So the best reading programs come with a clear scope and sequence and decodable texts that allow for cumulative practice. I know for me, I often need to bring in additional text. So like Niels was saying, so that my kids get the opportunity to tackle novel words with that phonics. But I always have to double check it with my scope and sequence to make sure they've been taught it. And the language comprehension screener, there's a great spreadsheet that we can link into the Padlet that has language comprehension screeners and their validity, reliability, predictability. We can put those in there. I think one of the things that's important to know is a lot of times they're not for administration by classroom teachers. They're for use by speech and language pathologists. There actually is a weakness of classroom material language screeners that we need to start working on filling.
We also want to share that you can continue using the Padlet, and we'll be happy to answer questions directly there with linked resources. Thank you so much for your time and energy today. Please get in touch with us if you have any questions or want to follow up about anything shared. We appreciate you very much, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.